Thank you, Parveen, for that introduction. It's really an honor to be here as part of CogX. Um, as you said, I'm the CEO of FounderTribes, which is an app that aims to democratize entrepreneurship by giving founders that are usually overlooked access to the networks and to the capital that they need and deserve. And I couldn't think of anyone better to chat about this than with Paula Groves and Arlan Hamilton, two powerhouse women who've been doing this at the very highest levels for so long. Paula is the Chief Investment Officer of Impactx Capital, and Arlan is the founder and managing partner of Backstage Capital, who famously wrote a book called It's About Damn Time. So I think with that, I'd like to welcome both of these wonderful ladies to the forum, and also to kind of ask each of them to kind of give their 1 minute pitch as to who they are. Probably they can do it a lot better than I did. So maybe we'll start with Paula. If you had to explain who you are personally as well as professionally to the audience in 1 minute, what would that be?
Well, that's a great question. If I knew who I was at this point, I'd probably be a little bit more articulate, but I'll do my best. I am a woman who's been investing in the underrepresented space since 1992. I launched my career with a firm out of Boston where we were focused on double bottom line results that included financial returns as well as job creation. I then launched a fund in 2000 that was focused on women and minority-led technology-oriented companies called Axon Capital. Then the .com crash happened and I ended up getting married and moving out to California. I then ultimately managed the U.S. Small Business Administration's consulting practice, where we served over 4,000 entrepreneurs. Subsequently, I ended up securing a contract with the city of Oakland, California, which is where I lived, where we provided access to capital to the most marginalized entrepreneurs in Oakland society. Those were people who have been formerly incarcerated, first-time entrepreneurs at the median income, 80% of the median income of the Oakland economic stature. So to summarize, Gary, I would say my entire career has been devoted to providing access to capital to underrepresented entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Awesome. And then Arlan, how would you describe yourself personally and professionally in 1 minute?
Sure. Arlan Hamilton, the founder and managing partner of Backstage Capital. We are a venture fund based in the United States. We invest in underestimated founders. So that's, in our case, women, people of color, and LGBTQ founders plus. We have invested in nearly 200 of those companies in the past 6 years or so. Launched Backstage officially about a decade ago. From the outside, I was in Dallas, Texas, looking in. I was personally not doing well financially, had never been, but I looked into the world of Silicon Valley and places like it as a hopeful place. And the more I dug in, the more I realized, it's hopeful for some, but not all. And I decided I was going to try to do something about that, try to change the narrative if I could. Launched Backstage, took about 3.5 years to get any traction on raising any capital. But in the fall of 2015, I was able to get my first yes from an angel investor and then turn that into about $20 million raised. We make very early investments in companies. We give that conviction, we give that early seed money, and then we work with them over the years to see if we can add more value to that. So a lot of those companies have gone on to raise much larger rounds and even more importantly to generate hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue across the portfolio. And I think we're just getting started.
That's awesome. So really quickly to you and to Paula as well, if I could ask you in maybe 30 seconds to summarize your investment thesis. So like founders out there can understand like what's the average ticket size, what are the verticals that you're interested in, anything else that they need to know before we continue into the story.
Sure. Well, Backstage typically invests anywhere between $25,000 and $250,000. We've invested more in some follow-ons, so we've invested up to $1.5 million into companies we've already invested in, and we continue to grow with our assets under management. But usually we're in that pocket, that early stage of pre-seed. About $100,000 is the average now, and we are agnostic across several industries. We do have an accelerator that's set up in London that we did in 2019 that we hope to come back to post-COVID world. And we're looking for the best and the brightest, the overachieving, underrepresented, and across many, many sectors, including CPG to banking to deep tech and SaaS.
Perfect. And Paula?
Yes, so thank you, Gary. I launched Impactx Capital in London with my partner, Eric Collins, in 2018. We currently have about 25 portfolio companies and projects that we've invested in. We are, fingers crossed, going to have our first close on our $100 million fund, which will be investing under the same thesis, but a larger check size. I would say that we are sort of seed stage agnostic. I think the word seed, and we can maybe talk about this a little bit later, is a little bit hard to understand because people define seed differently, but we do focus on underrepresented entrepreneurs. We'd like to see a revenue traction. You know, I always like to tell our entrepreneurs, I need to know that somebody else besides your mother is going to buy the product, right? So we like to see revenue traction and an understanding of the business model. Like, how are you actually going to make money? Revenue is absolutely the number one priority, but what's your cost structure going to be, and how much revenue do you actually have to have in order to be successful, and how much cash do you have to raise in order to make sure that you can build a long-term sustainable model? And those things are hard to define, but we do extensive quantitative analysis. We work very closely with our entrepreneurs to do this type of analysis so that we make sure that we are all on the same page, like with respect to what it's going to take to be successful. In terms of sectors, we have 3 primary sectors that we're focused on: digital and technology, health, education and lifestyle, and media and entertainment. Our media and entertainment portfolio is a little bit unique because we are actually developing and producing creative projects. So one of the benefits of COVID, if you can imagine that there's any benefit of COVID, is we all got to sit down and enjoy content. And so the streaming services like Amazon and Netflix have been developing content at rapid speed to sort of feed the entertainment appetite. And it's not just the US appetite, it's a worldwide appetite, right? So we've been successful developing creative projects specifically in the space in what we call our direct-to-series television model, where we are launching and developing shows for the entire world to watch. And one of the things that's unique about that portfolio is we are developing diverse content. We're working with diverse directors, actors, and producers and production companies to produce content that looks like us. So those are the 3 verticals that we invest in. In terms of check size, go ahead. Sorry.
No, sorry. Oh, that's the most important bit. So check size, and then we'll
I'm sorry. Probably a little bit too long. But our check size, we will do anything from as little as $100,000 to start. And then once the $100 million fund has been closed, I imagine we would invest as much as $5 to $10 million. But that would be through follow-ons, not an initial investment.
Perfect. Well, one of the questions I want to ask next is, we've seen in the US and in the UK that Black women in particular usually are kind of the least funded, right? I think the numbers are that in the US, Black women get like 0.2% of funding, and in the UK, it's like 0.02. And here we have 2 Black women who've raised loads of money. Can you tell us a little bit about the journey in terms of being able to kind of suspend disbelief and get people to give you large sums of cash in order to then invest in other people that look like you? Maybe we'll start with Arlan.
Can you all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny because I will speak for myself, but I imagine Paula can feel the same way sometimes. It may sound like loads of cash, but it is a drop in the bucket compared to our counterparts, and it is with so much effort, and it's with so much, personal sacrifice. We are moving mountains up mountains, right? And Paula's been doing this for 30 years. And, it is a individual, it's like hand-to-hand combat, right? It's like individual, you have these one-on-one conversations with people, and one out of however many, 100 might listen to you and get it. And the more I work on this, over the past decade, the more I I find ways, like we did this year with our Reg CF, I find ways for us not to be as dependent on outside larger LPs, because most of them don't get it. That is why there is such a disparity between the amount of capital that Black women and Black people are getting and others, because it really starts at the top, quote unquote, with these LPs, and most of them are not getting it. And it doesn't matter what you say to them or what you propose to them or what you show them data-wise. So, I mean, that's kind of a cynical viewpoint, but it's from experience and it's the truth. And so I have been spending a lot of my efforts now really trying to move forward this idea of more and more Black and brown angel investors, because that crowd, I think, is going to start to rival the VCs themselves and the LPs. But getting the amount that we have now is based on the evidence. These companies are that we invested in 2015 and 17, are just really, really kicking major butt. And at the end of the day, you shouldn't be able to deny that evidence. And so some people do get it.
Just a quick follow-up question to Arlan, because I was listening to a podcast that you did this morning with Jason Calacanis, where you were basically talking about the fact that, if in addition you are from the LGBT community like I am and you are, for example, or that you don't come from Stanford or MIT or whatever the case may be, that then there are kind of all of these additional barriers. So he felt like as a white guy that he was kind of discriminated because he was from Brooklyn, maybe didn't go to like the fancy schools. But then you pointed out that it's kind of even worse in some contexts. You want to give us a bit of a sense as to like how these additional factors play into your ability to raise capital? Sure.
And I mean, no matter what I identify as and no matter who I am, I'm going for the gusto here. So no excuse will stand, in my opinion. But it's true. Jason Calacanis, in that case, we've talked to each other for several years, and we kind of go back and forth on it. But he was saying, I'm a white guy, but I didn't grow up rich, and I didn't go to the best schools, and I've always been, the outlier. And I had to set him straight. When you add on the LGBTQ factor, well, you do have that intersectionality. You do have in certain circles. I remember 5 years ago, when I was just really starting to get some sort of traction on raising, I spoke to someone who would have been on one of the islands. I won't say which one because then it'll be too explicit, but one of the islands, who is a Black person who got everything that I was doing and wanted to have her government participate financially, but told me that I would have to strike the LGBTQ part out of it in order to get that capital. And I refused, of course. I said, of course I wouldn't. What if an LGBTQ LP came to me and said they would give me money if I struck out the Black part of it? I can't do that to myself, so why would I do that to my fund and my life's work? So you have things like that where you do face certain barriers there. I think also being a woman, a Black woman, and again, I'm just going to be straight with you because I don't think that we have much time to beat around the bush in life. There are times where I look at LP portfolios who are saying that they're investing in emerging managers of color, and they're all men emerging managers of color from certain schools. And so it's almost like it's on paper, it works, right? It works a little bit better. So we're all facing our own struggles and our own challenges, and there may be a challenge I'm not facing because I'm not a parent. There may be one that I'm not facing because of my location. I'm in Los Angeles and I have a lot of visibility, et cetera. So I think there's all kinds of things, and I think it's just important to remember that everybody is going through something, and that if any of us got ourselves, to a point, it took a lot to get us here.
No, awesome. And I guess, Paul, I want to ask you the question slightly differently, because sometimes when, like I go for things, people are like, oh, but you went to Yale, so you're not really the target that we're going after. So conversely, I guess you went to, I think you were at HBS and Eric was at like Harvard and Princeton, but you guys still have had like, difficulties in terms of raising. Can you give us a bit of a sense as to your perspective of how it works, even when you do have some of these boxes ticked?
I think the most consistent thing that I've seen, because I've been in this space a long time, since 1992, and the thing that I find most depressing is in 1992, less than 4% of venture capital dollars went to women, less than 2% of venture capital dollars went to African American entrepreneurs. Those numbers haven't changed. 20 years later, those numbers have not changed. I guess we're coming up on 30 years later, so those numbers haven't changed. And the question is why? To answer your question a little bit differently, one of the things that makes VC investing so difficult is that VC investors invest in people they know. They tend to invest in people that they were in fraternities with. They tend to invest in people that they rode crew with, people that they were, there were bridesmaids in their wedding, people that they've known a long time and whose families have been known to them a long time. So if you're not a part of that inner circle, and if you don't look like the VC investor, or they don't know somebody who knows you, who has spent time with you, it's very hard to break down that barrier. So even though I went to Stanford, I went to Harvard, Eric went to Princeton, he went to Harvard Law School, we're still outsiders, right? And so that's the thing that has been the hardest to break through, is breaking through being an outsider and demonstrating that you can indeed produce outside returns, even though I didn't, sit at your fraternity table.
So I guess following up with that, then, I mean, one of the things is that people sometimes seem to think that like Black people who are talented are like unicorns, like the idea, this whole pipeline myth. Like if you're Black, we can't find Black talent. I guess both of you, Arlan, you were saying before that you've had loads of companies that are now kind of popping and they're making money and they're growing and stuff like that. And Paula, you've also invested in companies. I know that you've exited from some. How do you find this Black talent? Because I guess for a lot of, maybe the white people out there, they're like, oh my God, they don't exist. I mean, we want to do that, but it's almost like they see it as like a charitable exercise that we need to educate people and help them, as opposed to, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Help us understand, how do you find talented Black entrepreneurs or brown entrepreneurs or women entrepreneurs, LGBT entrepreneurs that other people simply don't see? Let's start with Arlan.
Sure. Well, I just walk out the front door. I mean, the idea that they don't exist is it's insulting and ridiculous, and a fantasy that many people have gotten together and had to collectively. We have looked at 10,000 companies in the past 5.5 years, and we've invested in only 2% of what we've seen. And not every one of these companies should be looking at venture necessarily, but there are a lot of these companies who are viable. I think it just takes any amount of effort. I have seen white investors, mostly men, contort themselves to learn everything they can about cryptocurrency, to learn everything they can about autonomous vehicles, about sending themselves into space. Things that, are not just you pick up something for dummies and you know it the next day. These are things that take research, take time, take effort, and take interest. And if they can do that for those topics, why can't they do that for some of them, right? Not all of them, but why can't they do that for getting to know the landscape and the ecosystem that exists when there are so many of us out here? And on top of the funds that are being propped up and have been propped up for years, there are also a lot of organizations, there are a lot of for-profit and nonprofit organizations, individuals who are sourcing this talent left and right, and the only thing that they're lacking is a consistent flow of resources, whereas the people who have the consistent flow of resources but are very lacking in the talent are saying, I don't know where to look, I can't find anything. That is a conscious decision to be blissful and ignorant, right? To me, that tells me you're not very good at your job if you can't find Black founders of merit. I mean, they're everywhere. They're everywhere. You can start at backstagecapital.com, and you can also walk out your front door in most cases.
Awesome. And Paula, anything you want to add?
The only thing I just want to pick up on a thread, because Arlan completely articulated it so well. When, these mainstream VC funds decide that they want to focus on a new trend in society, whether it's cryptocurrency or autonomous vehicles, they proactively go after and develop these trends and identify these trends and evaluate these trends. So why don't they apply the same sort of aggressive, proactive approach to finding Black founders? I'm not quite sure.
Well, I want to jump on to kind of the very name of your fund, Paula, Impactx. Why did you guys choose to kind of focus so much on the impact? It's the very first word in terms of your fund. Because what I found is anytime you say that you want to do anything dealing with non-white people, people want to call it charity. They think that there's a deficiency that is trying to be solved for. So do you think that calling it Impactx was the right move, or do you think that then means people think that you're about charity? Should investing in Black people be considered impact or charity, or should it just be considered good business?
I think of it slightly differently, because we are committed to not just making financial returns, but having an impact in this world. Our domain and space and swimming pool, whatever analogy you want to use, happens to be Black founders. But we're not just about creating financial returns. We are also about creating an impact. We believe you can do both. And again, why mainstream society says that if you're doing impact, you have to compromise financial returns, I'm not sure, because that's not at the core of what we believe. It's not enough just to produce money. We're out to change the world and have a huge impact. And that's why we called ourselves Impactx.
So then maybe if I follow up and then kind of invite Arlan to the conversation as well. Now it seems that there's a lot of conversation about ESG, environment, social governance, whatever. And there's a lot more focus on the S, whereas before there was a lot on the G. Are you seeing that LPs are finally saying, hey, we agree with you, Paula, we should be doing more to kind of foment social justice. And now we want to invest more of our money into funds that either support people of color or are led by people of color? What's the experience been for you over the last years post George Floyd and the sudden reawakening of the kind of global conscience on race? Let's start with Arlan this time.
Yeah, definitely have seen it. One of our portfolio companies, Blendor, which may be a company that we're both in, they just did a report that showed that the companies, not the LPs, but the companies who, like the Fortune 500 companies that spoke the loudest about what they were going to do and who they were going to help and all of that, last August and last summer, did the least amount so far as actual movement. And I think that's interesting if you compare it to some of the things that I was saying back then, and a lot of us were saying back then in press about what we were foreseeing this looking like. On the LP side, and some of those Fortune 500s have become LPs because of this. You have your PayPals and your Apples and et cetera. On the LP side, yeah, there's definitely a lot of talk. There's a lot of rumblings. People are scrambling as if, they knew all along, and how dare their fund of funds or their intermediaries not be in these not have them in these funds. I definitely personally talked to dozens of these types of LPs over the past several months. And you can see it. You can see it with Ulu Ventures. You can see it with Harlem Capital. You can see it with 645, which I think was already on their way to raising such a large fund. You can see it with MAC. You can see it with so many funds, with Impactx. You can see it with funds getting to these points, finally having some assets under management that are more in line with the quality of the fund, rather than us getting the scraps, as I've called it, the crumbs. But I don't want that to make anyone feel complacent and to feel like, oh, we did our job and yes, we've said what we would do. That is, again, a drop in the bucket. There are billions. I think in 2018 or 19, there was something like $130 billion in venture funding that went out. Mm-hmm. And we got, Black women got the equivalent of I forgot the name of the scooter company. I probably blocked it out of my memory, but There's a scooter company who got a $225 million round of Series C or something. That's the equivalent that all Black women in the United States got that year, that same year that the billions went out. So there's so much to be done. And let's be clear here too. Just because you're a Black investor, it doesn't mean that you're only investing in Black founders. I mean, there's a great place for all of us. There's a mixture, and I think it's important to realize that to your point about only categorizing ourselves into a certain space. I think that there has to be Impactx. I think that clarity and that putting the line in the sand of who you are and what you represent is so important. And then there has to be a Backstage Capital who is scrappy and who is not afraid to ruffle feathers. And then there has to be the Collab Capitals and the Harlem Capitals and the Macs of the world who are strictly going to kick major butt when it comes to returns.
Awesome. Paula?
I'm going to kick major butt when it comes to returns also, Arlan. Let's just be clear.
I don't really want to I don't obsessive at all. I was actually saying that, their lens is slightly less impact when it comes down to it. And I absolutely plan on being, incredibly obnoxiously wealthy based on Backstage Capital.
Great. I just want to say one thing about George Floyd movement, because that was one of the questions that Gary was able to share with Arlan and myself right before we jumped on the call. And, I think that for parts of the Black community, it was a collective sigh of relief, because it was almost like, see, we are not lying. Right? Here's the evidence. Here's the video. Here's proof that what we've been talking about with regards to racism, systemic racism, unconscious bias, whatever label is most appropriate for the swimming pool that you're in, this is real. This is real. And it was quite inspiring to see some of the corporations step up to the plate with regards to committing financial resources to help Black entrepreneurship. Now, I also agree with something else that Arlan said, which is some people did pay lip service. That is indeed true. And that's probably true in most movements in our society, not just the Black movement. But there are the chosen few who actually said they were going to write a check. They are writing checks and they are making a difference. And this validates our space, provides additional access to capital to entrepreneurs. And that is a rising tide that we can all benefit from.
So to kind of follow up on that point, because one of the things that I worry about is that, you had Obama, it looked like we were like in a racial panacea. And then all of a sudden we had Trump and it was like, what the? So do you think that this is kind of a definitive step forward, or should we already be previewing a backlash, which is that there's going to come a point, kind of like sometimes you see in the UK, where people are saying, why are you focusing so much on Black people? Why aren't you focusing on socioeconomic? Why aren't you focusing on people from rural communities? Like, why do Black people get all of this attention? Like, where do you think that we're going to be 10 years from now, to your point, Paula, that like you've been hearing the same numbers and the same claims for 30 years? Do you think that there's been a definitive before or and after, or is this just kind of a moment of pause where we can kind of all feel really happy and then we'll go back to the same old and the same old numbers in the next 10 years? Let's start with Paula this time.
Sure. I believe this last election is proof positive that we are moving forward. I think that Trump got more votes than any other president in the United States, except for one, Biden. So even though that backlash might be still an undercurrent in our society, and it is an undercurrent. If you've ever gone swimming in the ocean reaches the shore, it pushes forward, the undercurrent pulls you back, but it continues to push even further forward. So is there going to be a backlash undercurrent? Yes, absolutely. We're seeing evidence of it in so many different ways, but that doesn't mean the tide won't reach a higher point on the shore. And that's what I foresee in the future.
Arlan?
I hope you write something more about that if you haven't already. I love that. That makes a lot of sense. I agree, and I think there's a certain optimism that we have to have in order to press forward. So I am an eternal optimist at the end of the day. But I also think what was different about this time is, at least from what I could see, is that while these institutions may go back to the status quo and get complacent and get comfortable once again, and some of them already are, there is a stirring of the crowd, of us, right? Of the Black people we're talking about, the founders and the investors and the future investors and the future founders that will not go back into the box. We will not go back and hide away. And I think that's what is so exciting about this time, is that it doesn't really matter if these large institutions continue to get it or not. We have awoken something within ourselves that says, no more. We just won't take it anymore. We won't take it anymore. And it's a combination of George Floyd, his murder. It's a combination of Trump, and it's a combination of seeing in the United States, for us, for me, it's seeing that, oh, really, like 1 out of every 3 people, or 1 out of every 3 adults I'm passing is actually pretty racist. It seems, like it's those things that combination of, we don't have any time to be pleasant anymore and to ask nicely anymore, or to wait for our turn, because if we were to wait for our turn, we would never get it. And I think that is what you're going to see the next decade. You're going to see us taking what already belongs to us.
And do you think it makes sense that we need to kind of find a way to accommodate the poor white people that say, well, hey, what about me? Maybe this should be kind of race neutral, or we should do it in a way that it's more on socioeconomic and not entirely on race? Let's start with Arlan.
White person who is saying, what about me, is going to be just fine. They're going to be just fine. And I know that that's a blanket statement. And obviously by the vote for Trump, there are a lot of white people who feel disenfranchised and feel like they're not being heard. But when it comes to that's how they spoke their piece. They voted and they stormed our Capitol and they did all these things because, they were upset. They're speaking their piece. We need to be able to speak our piece. And, all of the Black people that I know who are speaking our piece are doing it in a much more professional and a much more humane way than I've seen there. But no, I don't think that we need to placate and protect and I'm going to stop saying a certain word, but I don't think that we need to be the caretakers of our oppressors. No.
All right, and then
can I just say one thing about that? Why does it have to be either or? Arlan, how much money did you say was invested in venture capital over the last billions and billions and billions?
So billions of dollars in the last 3 or 4 years.
Why does it have to go to all white men? I mean, there is enough money to go around. There doesn't have to be such a concentration of opportunity. We're all capable. Poor white men are capable. Gorgeous Black women are capable. Smart Black, Hispanics are capable. Why does there have to be such a concentration? We have more than enough resource. It's I think about the food system, and I there's this poignant picture of a woman holding a starving child in front of a bin in Ethiopia. There was more than enough food in Ethiopia. It was the distribution system that was broken. And that's kind of how I feel about venture capital. There is more than enough venture capital to go around to support all communities. It's the distribution system that has to be fixed.
No, I like that. And so last thing I'm going to ask, because I know we only have about 3 minutes. Well, I'm going to be cheeky and ask 2 questions. First is, how do we empower more Black and brown people to become angel investors and hopefully eventually LPs? Arlan, you mentioned before that you think this really is the future. You've obviously done a kind of recent crowdfunding campaign that's kind of disrupting the ecosystem. How do we kind of empower Black and brown people to become agents as opposed to just beneficiaries?
I've started an academy for entrepreneurs, and I've also started more recently an academy for future and seasoned investors at arlan.capital. That's the URL is arlan.capital. And my goal is, I don't know the number yet. I'm still thinking about what that number looks like, but imagine 1,000 new Black and brown and women and LGBTQ angel investors that are kind of empowered to know that they can have impact and that they can diversify their investments in the startup space over a short amount of time. And that's kind of what I'm looking at right now. I just think what I've learned while teaching the first 2 cohorts of it is that so many people do not realize that they already can be angel investors. They don't have to wait until they're rich. They don't have to wait. They don't have to wait for some big goal. They can already start. And you saw that with crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is just such a wonderful, wonderful thing that is only going to get better and only going to allow for more and more people to fit into that bucket and that category of angel investor. And yes, I think still there needs to be higher and higher ranks of Black and brown people in these major funds with billions under management, because then it's all about striking at different places and not just going in one model. So I think there's a lot ahead of us.
Perfect. Paula, anything to add? Because we have like 1 minute.
I think it's a mission thing. It's a belief thing. It's a core thing. Now is our time. I'm looking at the book Becoming on and behind Arlan Capital, and I just love the sentiment behind that. It is our time. It is up to us to support ourselves, invest in ourselves, and really honor ourselves. So that's the only thing I would add.
Yeah, I saw this phrase recently, we are the change we've been waiting for. So last thing would be, any advice to aspiring VCs or founders out there who are saying, now is our time, what should I do? Like, yeah, well, in really quickly, in 30 seconds, what would your advice be to aspiring VCs and or founders who happen to be of color or otherwise underestimated?
Don't give up, persevere, and believe in yourself. You'll get it done.
All right, and Arlan?
Hey, this is your time. You do not have to wait for permission. This is your time. There are a lot of examples now. There have been in the past, but they're even more amplified with social and everything. Go look for the person, the people you want to study under. You have that now, that access, and it is yours for the taking. There's no time for imposter syndrome at this point.
Awesome. Well, with that, thank you guys so much. You did not kind of underperform. You guys were both brilliant. Thank you so much. I think I've learned a lot. And now I want to turn it back over to Parveen.